to do more of an improv style quilting does not always mean that it needs to be complex and time consuming and crazy. I know that's what mine tend to turn into, but I started a new quilt. Probably, I realized, not the best time for me to be starting a new quilt because, like my daughter just reminded me when I told her I started a new quilt, she said, what? You haven't even finished your house quilt yet. And that's true technically, but I'm just hand quilting it. And yes, I got stalled for a little while, but I've been back to it because the county fair is next month. I'm determined to enter that into the Kentucky State Fair. Kentucky State Fair. And so now I have a motivation to finish, but that's a different kind of sewing than like sewing room sewing. And so I wanted to start something new. So I started a new quilt. And by started, I mean I have this much of it. This is all I have so far, but this one cute fish blossomed into an entire new idea. This is how most of my improv quilts start out. Very, very primitive on paper, but very, very complex in my mind. So I'm gonna make a few more fish along the way of this video, hopefully. But also, I want to talk today about just the topic of quilting without patterns. So I'm Nikki, this is Pin Cut Sew, and this is a topic that I have really enjoyed delving into this past year. I think that this has been one of my most productive quilting years. I mean, I do all kinds of sewing and things ebb and flow, and some years I've just made mostly garments, and other years mostly quilts, and other years mostly crafty things, whatever. But this has been a year of improv quilting, and I have been enjoying it so much. So I'm going to give you some tips to get started with quilting without patterns, maybe some mindset shifts to help you get out of your pattern only mindset, and then also I'm going to show you how to make one of these fish. This is not my pattern. I'll show you whose it is. And then I'm going to provide you with some books and resources, like favorite books of mine, for this kind of quilting. So let's get right into it. I have been learning that inspiration is greater than patterns, for me anyway. There's nothing wrong with patterns. That is not what I'm saying. What I am not saying is that something is wrong with a quilter who only quilts with patterns. That's great. I have made many quilts with patterns, both simple and complex. So if you only want to use patterns, more power to you. But if you really want to stretch your creativity, there's nothing like quilting as you go along and sort of making things work and making it up that sort of just stretches your imagination and becomes so much fun in the process. So not using a quilt pattern really stretches your creativity and what you can do and what you can come up with and what you like, more so than using a pattern does. What I am also not saying is that not using a pattern means not making anything traditional or any normal quilt blocks. I made several quilts this last year, some baby quilts that I have tutorials for here, that were actually just a simple block. In my mid-century modern quilt that I made, I saw that online and I said I could make that with a simple block. So if you see a simple block, maybe you don't need to buy the fancy pattern. Just find out what block that is, learn to make it, and then surround it with your own things, your own sashing, your own cornerstones. Put them together in different ways that you think looks good, and that can be just as creative of a process as making something improv and complicated too. So to do more of an improv style quilting does not always mean that it needs to be complex and time consuming and crazy. I know that's what mine tend to turn into, but okay, the best part about not using patterns though, and I have videos on keeping quilting frugal. This is probably my number one tip. Stop using the fancy patterns. Part of the reason is because when you're quilting without a pattern, you get to use what you already have. Not only do you save money on the pattern, you save money on the supplies that the pattern usually requires. It usually requires yardage of certain kinds of colors and solids and prints, and a lot of times these quilts are sold as a these patterns are sold as a promotion for a fabric line, so then you get stars in your eyes about your fabric lines. You think you need to have all of these modern, newest fabrics and quilt patterns, and you don't. It's great if you want to. These patterns are beautiful. I am not saying that these quilt patterns are not worth their price, because they absolutely are. It is a lot of work putting out a quilt pattern. But if you're on a budget, and or if you already have an overwhelming amount of fabric or just plenty, and you would have to buy new supplies to make a certain pattern, change course. Figure out what it is that makes that pattern like makes up most of that pattern. Like, what is the basic block in it? You can probably make something similar that is yours, your creation, with what you already have in your drawer. To award even more points to making up your own quilts instead of using patterns is that it prevents you from getting bored. If you are like me, you pull out a quilt pattern and it's telling you to cut hundreds of little rectangles and squares and triangles before you ever get started. Even worse if it comes with like its own little weird shaped template. Forget it. I am out. I don't want to cut that many. When I can quilt my own way, I can make as many half square triangles as I want as I go, picking out fabrics as I go. I really cannot, my brain just can't do the same thing over and over and over again. Even though I know I do have, like, in Layla's quilt, I did make, I think, like 140 half square triangles. And these are all the half square triangles that now I have to trim. That's the worst part, guys. But I was almost to the end, so I had like motivation in mind and I could just make them in batches and pick out fabrics as I went. It kept it interesting. But there is no way I'm going to pre-cut hundreds of little pieces. Forget it. So for me, making up my own quilts keeps me from being bored. It keeps me inspired because I don't always even know what the next element is going to be. Sometimes I do. And it just keeps me interested, and so I actually finish things. For me, that's a huge benefit. And the last one before we get into this fish block is it helps you to learn new skills, because if you're making a quilt with just one block, you learn to make that one block. But if you use that block as inspiration for building your own quilt from it, you learn all kinds of things about how things fit together, what works with what, values, colors, all of that kind of stuff as you go along. And with an improv style quilt, like I'm about to embark on again, you might learn to sew curves at the same time as you're gonna learn to sew trees, like wonky trees. It's funny that I couldn't think of any examples outside of what I'm planning for this quilt. But being able to put your own quilt together, you can practice skills that you might not otherwise if you're using a pattern. So the whole point of this is to say that when you're shopping for quilting books or you're looking at quilts on Instagram or in quilt shows, use those as inspiration, not to copy them exactly, but to be inspired by them to create your own thing. And that's why I believe that inspiration is greater than patterns a whole lot of the time. So I have made one fish block. My plan is to make a lot of fish. I think this one might be too big for what I ended up planning. What I want to do is make like river down here at the bottom, full of fish, and then it'll get like foamy. Maybe it's more like the ocean. Something up here. And then I want to make like trees. I want to make like a tree line and then maybe some mountains. I think I might put some tents in there. And then like a sunshine or the sky or whatever. So this is my extremely primitive little drawing, but I have these for almost all my recent quilts. Oh, here's my house one. This one's funny. Okay, this is this is my wonky neighborhood drawing. See how basic that is? And it ended up being this giant, massive thing. It was bigger than me, but it made for a beautiful, beautiful end product. So today I have a book called Inspiring Improv by Nicholas Ball. And the whole reason I bought this book is because I saw these fish on Pinterest. I tracked this down and I love this book because it's the exact thing that I was just talking about. He teaches you to do several techniques without telling you how to make the very quilts that he made, because he wants to inspire you to use the individual elements in a quilt of your own. So he has lines, he has lots of tips in here, and he has curves, and he has, oh, here's leaves, that's kind of cool. Triangles, this will be handy for the tent section. This is the same way as I made my wonky trees. Looking for the fish, here it is. See his fish quilt? So cool! So I'm gonna make a couple more fish today and let's see what happens. If you're interested in purchasing this book, I will definitely put it in the description below. And then after I make a fish or two, I'm gonna show you some more books that I'm really loving and that you can use to help you get started with making your own quilts out of the ideas from them. So let's get started making the fish. See how it goes. I haven't made one in a while, so hopefully I remember how. We'll see. Okay, so in here, what's his name? Oh, Nicholas Ball. He has some instructions for freehanding curves. And my favorite of his instructions is, not for the first time in this book, take the pressing instruction to mean vigorous ironing. So basically he irons these pieces into submission and that makes this nice curve. So to make the fish, my technique ended up being just a tad different, which is fine in quilting, right? So let me find a couple of fabrics to work with. I have all of these very saturated fabrics set aside. I think I might go with these for this quilt because they're so bright and fun. I want to keep my backgrounds blue for the most part. What if I made my fish this and my background this and my tail this? That's what I'm gonna do. So with his technique, he made the fish tail first, but I'm gonna make that last. So what I need to do is press my fish fabric, and then what I want to do is use my rotary cutter, and I'm just going to cut out a fish shape. This one I'm gonna make smaller than my last one. The more exaggerated your curve, the somewhat trickier it can be to sew together with its background, but don't worry too much about it. It's really not very hard. Okay, then I'm going to use my background fabric. In this book, he recommends... Do you need something?
No.
I could hear his feet like pounding down the... Okay, let's see here. I'm going to cut off a rectangle of my background. Oops. I'm going to mimic my fish shape. Let's see, how does this work again? Okay, I'm going to put this over here upside down. I'm going to mimic my fish shape with it. Now I'm going to pin my fish shape. I have no pins because of my thieving children. I'm going to just curve my background to match my fish. And as I sew, I'm going to make sure I don't have puckers in it. Eventually, you might get confident enough to do this without pinning, if you can believe that. So what you don't want to do is get it too bunched up so you have a tuck here when you're sewing. You want to curve this, maybe even stretch it the teeniest bit. It's cut on the bias now that you curved it, so it curves really easily. Okay, I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and sew it. Oh, there's no thread in my machine. Thieving children. All right, going to simply start. When I piece things, I like to lower my stitch length just a little bit. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam. Using my fingers to make sure I don't have any tucks. If I see a tuck coming, I can raise my presser foot and sort of get them out of the way. Okay. Now here's what we have. Look, a fish body. Okay, now let's do the vigorous ironing. If there's any wrinkles around here, they come right out when ironed. Okay, now what we're going to do is get another piece of background fabric. We want it to go on this side of it, with the bulk of it over here. And I'm going to, let me make sure my edges are all the way on my piece of fabric. Going to cut a new background. Discard, put that in the scrap bin. Now you have the inner curve and the outer curve. I'm going to now piece this together the same way. I always start pinning in the middle and then curve this around from edge to edge. And now I'm gonna go sew this piece. All right, now I have this. I can't, let's see, I pressed the last one towards the fish. I played around with which direction to press it because I don't think he says. He doesn't seem to say, so, and I decided that it didn't really matter. Either way worked fine. As long as you do it like you said and press vigorously. So here is my fish body. Darn cute so far. Now we're gonna make a fish tail. So on this fish, I didn't make it like a skinny point here. I went with a wider one. On this one, I am gonna do the skinny point because I think his look really cute like that. So this triangle technique in this book is the same as the triangle technique in my Make It Wonky book. Quick plug, you can learn a lot of these techniques, improv quilting techniques. Here's my triangles right here. In this Make It Wonky book, and also the Improv Houses book, if you want to get started with making your own quilt designs in a liberated way, this would be a good place to start. You can find these both in my shop on Etsy. I'll put them in the very first part of the description and in the first comment. So first I'm going to cut a triangle. Let's go ahead and turn to his triangle instructions and see if they're the same as mine. If they're not, that only goes to show that there is more than one way to do almost every technique in quilting. Okay, so yes, his are very similar to mine. Going to cut a triangle out of my tail fabric. Let's see. I think I want it to be like this. I think that's cute. And then I'm going to get a square of my background fabric. I'm sure you're noticing that nothing about this needs to be perfect. Not even measuring and using my rotary cutter right now. Okay, so first we're going to, right after I said that, here I am going to use my ruler. Did I say rotary cutter? I meant ruler. I'm going to cut this angle first. I'm going to attach this on to this side of my triangle, just like this, in the middle. And then I'm going to make a line in this direction. And now I'm going to attach this side onto this side of my triangle. You can also just use strips. You've seen me do that probably with the trees or making other triangles. Just cut a strip, add it onto this side, cut another strip, add it onto this side. If this method feels a little complicated for you. And I'm going to sew this onto the other side. And pressy press. Okay, so now in order to attach these together and make them look like the tail to a fish body, I'm going to cut this 1/4 inch from the corner here. It can be at an angle if you want, or it can be as straight as you can get it. And I'm going to cut this point of the tail also 1/4 inch from its point. And now I can attach this to this, making sure I get it at the right spot, which is right there. Get some pins in it. I think I probably should have made this side bigger, because now I'm going to have a pretty small backgrounded fish, but at the same time I was trying to make it smaller than this, or else my quilt, my fish were all going to look huge while my mountains and trees looked small. So maybe this will work after all. Or maybe I should have just made this part smaller. Okay, wow, look at how perfect that is. Okay, I'm going to press that probably open to reduce bulk. And now I can trim it. So on this fish, I made a piece out here so it looked like he was fully surrounded by the ocean, but then I noticed that in his fish quilt, he did not add, like this is a different piece, he did not add that strip at the end of the tail. He just attached it onto the next fish. And so I think I'm gonna leave it like he did it for now. At this point, I do want to make a rectangle with 90-degree angles. So since I have the least fabric over here, let me square this one up first. Then I need to straighten up the tail. Okay, there's my fish. I think it's really cute. So when I'm putting these together, I will add strips, or I will make more fish, like 2 little ones would fit here. So this can get as many fish or as few fish as I want. I think actually if I just cut the background down on this one, I think he'll fit in after all. So that is how to make a fish block a la Nicholas Ball. I don't know why I keep wanting to call him Christopher. My bad. I wonder if he has a YouTube channel. Let me just check. Nicholas Ball. Oh look, he's so famous, people are clapping for him. Doesn't look like he has a channel, but he's appeared on other channels. So anyway, thank you Nicholas for making this book. I think it's very inspiring and there's a lot of great ideas in here. As for some other books you might want to try, I just got this one from the library. It's Quilt Your Own Adventure with math tables. You know what a hard time I have with math. So if that part freaks you out, because you're either not good at math or you have too much of a mathy brain to just totally wing it, this book has a lot of blocks that can fit together with the other blocks in the book to make very, very cool quilts. So this would be a great place to start. This is Quilt Your Own Adventure by Amanda Carey. I'm not sure if I said that right. And then of course I have my collection of Gwen Marston books. She has passed away now, but this is what
gave me a lot of inspiration when I was making my house quilt. I also have one Liberated Medallion quilts, and these are a really, really great resource. She was so creative and so helpful in how to make certain elements. So I highly recommend anything you can get your hands on by Gwen Marston. I use this technique in my moon block. And then this was actually the very first quilting book I ever bought, and I since got rid of it because sometimes I go on these weird purging sprees where I just get rid of a ton of stuff. And I rebought this one recently because I remembered it being so helpful. And she helps you learn to make traditional quilt blocks and then how to sew them together in rows to make all kinds of unique and interesting quilt designs. So this is a good one to start with. I think actually I was thinking about in the ocean or the ocean waves part of my, it's this one, of my quilt that I'm making, I could make these little waves like this. Greek keys they're called. Have you seen quilts where they make these look like waves? I might try that, we'll see. And then of course you can buy Make It Wonky in Improv houses in my shop. Oh, and I also have my America's Glorious Quilts book. This is the one I got for $7 at the used bookstore. And a lot of you have asked about it and have been able to find it. So you can still get this book online used for not very much money. So this is just a wealth of absolute inspiration for quilt making. They are all extremely creative. Most of them are antique, but just the creativity that these women put into these quilts is so inspiring. So this has been a really, really great and fun resource for me, not to mention educational. So there are some great books for you to try out. Please let me know if this has inspired you at all, and recommend more resources to us in the comments if you want to. And I'll see you all soon, maybe with more elements to my newest improv quilt. Wish me luck. See you all later. Bye.